my only first two hesitations are the idea that we have principles first, which we then apply. I mean, there's an intuition in which that's right, but I would prefer a more pragmatic kind of engagement, discovering the principles in the process of engaging, not a theory first, practice second. You didn't say it. You didn't say that, but I would require more of a reflective praxis. That's my first reaction, more reflective praxis instead of theory first, then practice. The second one is that all the examples that the three of you have used have been how many senators we have, Washington, D.C., examples in America, which of course is your context and was mine until 3 years ago. Now that I'm in Norway, it is so different looking at America. It's so different looking at the universe when you're not in America. The world really looks different once you pass the intercontinental borders. And so an important part of making progressive, I actually like the word progressive as long as we don't mean liberal in the sense that you mean too, will have to be international. Globalization is going to be a really key issue here.
I actually thought of the Scandinavian model, the Norwegian and Swedish model of diplomacy, as something that I'm arguing, it's a controversial claim, better portrays what I would expect as sort of Christian, broadly Christian approach. It's not uniquely Christian. Norway and Sweden are some of the most secular nations in the world.
So, I mean, think about, maybe this is a way of clarifying by contrast. I mean, think about just war theory, right? I mean, one could hear what you're saying, and I think that what Ron was reacting to was a little bit hearing that as if it was a new version of something like a just war theory. You know, you have criteria, you have a methodology, you have a way of asking the question, right? There are certain criteria under which it's conceivable that a war could turn out to be just and others under which it might not. And of course, that's not a decision. Christians aren't buying into a decision about any particular war, they're buying into a methodology for assessing wars. And so you're saying, you know, maybe there's a methodology we can all agree on, even if we don't all agree on a set of concrete decisions. And then Laurent, in response to that, is saying, well, even that would have to be worked out sort of pragmatically and, I guess, dialectically, right? You'd have to sort of try a little bit, see how things work out, and see what you can come up with. You know, one might be a little bit skeptical about about the question of how you would get people to buy into the methodology when they already have multiple concrete commitments that precede that methodology. I mean, you see what I'm saying? I mean, the multiplicity, and again, it comes right back down to the same problem, which is that the reason you can't get a unitary voice may be the same reason you're not going to get people to buy into a methodology, because some people will hear your methodology and say, well, that's just kind of one world idealism, and yeah, of course you're going to go for Scandinavian, you probably believe in socialist medicine or something like that, right? Socialized medicine. And but I actually see the situation much more clearly than that, they might say. I mean, I see that, you know, there's good and evil out there, you got to pick and choose and so on. So they're not going to buy your methodology for the same reason that all these other attempts to provide a unified perspective. Let's just think of, in the most general terms, the most abstract possible terms. Is there anything that Christians are going to be able to agree on? If they can't agree theologically, and if they can't agree on substantive judgments about political controversies, and they can't agree on policies, they can't agree on methodologies. Why assume that they could agree on methodologies? Now, what you could do, I think what Laurent was suggesting, which is kind of, I hadn't thought about it, but it's kind of intriguing, is you could say, okay, let's not imagine a methodology for addressing policy questions, but let's have a methodology for sort of how we interact, you know, with each other, and see what kind of emerges from that. And I mean, that's a totally different perspective, and it's something that you might think about. Could you get people to kind of buy into that? There's a sort of Christian way of interacting with people, with other Christians, with other religions, that you could sort of develop. And if you develop that, you know, what might emerge from that over time, a kind of Rawlsian, I mean, it becomes a kind of Rawlsian process. You know, you've sort of got people agreeing to operate together in a certain way, and maybe consensus will emerge on certain principles from that. Maybe not, you know, I mean, because I think...
Yeah, that's kind of the thing I think of, like, in those big conversations, maybe that's the best we can go for. Internally, what I hear is, blessed are the peacemakers. And so even if you're dealing with those abstract concepts of what can we all agree to that then apply to this situation, I think, well, Jesus called me to be a peacemaker. What's that look like? And if I just take it down to dealing with my wife, there's sometimes principles go out the window if I'm going to attempt to be a peacemaker. And she lives with me, so I know that's true more often than not. And so I think, like, for the church, part of getting over Christendom is getting over being the one who gets to set the conditions for the conversation. And so often I hear progressives begin like that. Well, I'm a just war theorist, so, world, here's the conditions under which we can blah, 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 blah. And all of a sudden, for them to even join your conversation, they've had to buy your whole tradition, the way you've thought, or at least understand it well enough to converse with you. I think for us, we have to be canonic to join the conversation that's already going, and join knowing that the only identity we're really committed to if we're discussing war and peace is we're going to be a peacemaker. I don't know what that's going to turn out like, but as I go, I'm going to go seeking after the way of Jesus. And that may mean I end up at odds with other Christians. I may end up joining people from other faiths, but that's my identity as I go forth.